The southern tip of Manhattan, you're looking at the World Trade Center. We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't know anything more than that. We don't know if it was a commercial aircraft. We don't know if it was a private aircraft. We have no idea how many were on board or what the extent of the injuries are right now. We have, I understand, an eyewitness on the phone right now. Sir, good morning. This is Bryant Gumbel. Could you give us your name?
Yeah, my name is Stuart.
Stuart, where are you right now?
I'm working at a restaurant in Soho.
All right, so tell us what you saw, if you would.
I was waiting at a table and I literally saw it seemed to be like a small plane. I just heard a couple noises. It looked like it bounced off the building, and then I just saw a huge ball of fire on top. And then the smoke seemed to simmer down, and it just, a lot of smoke was coming out, and that's pretty much the extent of what I saw.
Can you tell us about the scene down there right now?
Right now, people are just on the street looking at the building. The building, there's just a lot of smoke. It's not too crazy down where I am.
How far away from the World Trade Center specifically are you?
I'm actually on Thompson Street North. I'm not too far.
It's 8:54 right now, Stuart. Can you tell me when this happened exactly?
I would have to say about 10 minutes ago.
Were you looking up as the plane approached the building, or did it only catch your attention after it crashed into the World Trade Center?
I heard a sort of a crashing sound, but I looked up quick enough to actually see something go into the building, but everything happened so fast I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at.
So there's no way you can know whether or not the plane seemed to be in trouble before it crashed into the building?
Oh, no, I couldn't tell.
It's hard for us to tell from the picture we're seeing just how far down from the top that plane crashed. Have you any better eyesight to it from your vantage point?
Not really. All I know is it definitely wasn't the top of the building, because that seems to be intact from what I saw.
Obviously, the timing of this is important. It comes before 9 o'clock. Perhaps, and we say that in hopeful fashion, perhaps not everybody was at work, because if that building was in fact crowded with workers, we're looking at probably some casualties and injuries of considerable proportions. But right now there's no way of telling that. We're on the line with another eyewitness. Sir, this is Bryant Gumbel in New York.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. You're Wendell?
Yes, I am.
Wendell, can you give me your last name?
Klein.
Wendell Klein. Tell me where you are, if you would.
Well, right now I'm back in the hotel. I'm in the hotel offices here, the front office.
You're in the... Okay, where were you when
I was standing right in front of the hotel. I'm the doorman there. And...
The hotel. Which hotel?
Marriott World Trade Center.
Right across from the World Trade Center.
It's actually right in between them.
Right in between the World Trade Center.
Yes.
Okay, so you were standing outside, and tell us what you saw and what you heard.
Well, what I heard first, an explosion. And I just figured that it was a plane passing by. Then all of a sudden, stuff just started falling, like bricks and paper and everything. And so I just kind of ran inside to get away from the falling debris and glass and so forth. Then... after everything stopped, because it was falling in the street and the cars were crashing into each other. And then when it kind of stopped, I heard a guy screaming. And when I looked over, there was this guy that was on fire. So I kind of ran over, and I tried to put the fire out on him. And he was screaming, and I just told him to roll, and he said he can't. And then another guy came over with his bag and kind of put the flames out on him. So. Right now, he's being taken care of. I just had everyone call the ambulance and stuff so it can help him out. He
caught fire as a result of the falling debris?
Yeah.
How much debris, can you give us an idea of how much came crashing to the ground?
It's just a lot. Bricks, a lot of bricks, a lot of glass. Enough to damage cars on the street, make cars swerve into each other, that kind of thing.
I hear alarms going off down there. What's happening?
That's our hotel alarm, and basically... I guess that went off automatically. They've evacuated everyone in the hotel and evacuated all employees.
They have evacuated the hotel?
Yes.
Immediately?
Yes.
Are you hearing anything, Wendell, about what kind of a plane it was or how many were on board?
No.
All right. Mr. Klein, thank you very much, sir. I understand Teresa Renault is with us right now. Ms. Renault, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
This is Bryant Gumbel. I'm down on 59th and 5th. Where are you?
I am in Chelsea, and we are at 8th and 16th. We are the tallest building in the area, and my window faces south. so it looks directly onto the World Trade Center. And I would say, approximately 10 minutes ago, there was a major explosion from probably, it looks like about the 80th floor. It looks like it's affected probably 4 to 8 floors. Major flames are coming out of the north side and also the east side of the building, yes. And it was very loud explosion followed by flames, and it looks like the building is still on fire on the inside.
Which building are we talking about? The one that's westernmost?
Let's see. Yes, sir.
Did you hear the explosion from
yes.
your position?
Yes, we did. As a matter of fact, we heard it, and because I was just like standing there pretty much looking out the window, I didn't see what caused it or if there was an impact.
So you have no idea right now?
Oh, there's another one. Another plane just hit. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit. It hit another building. Flew right into the middle of it. Explosion. My God, it's right in the middle of the building.
This one into the east tower?
Yes. Right in the middle of the building. And right now, that was definitely looked like it was on purpose.
You saw a plane?
Yes, I just saw a plane go into the building.
Why do you say that was definitely on purpose?
Because it just flew straight into it. Looks like it's about, I would say 15 floors lower than the first building, and there's now flames coming out of that building as well. They're both completely on fire.
Now, Teresa, hang on with us 1 second. We're going to re-rack the tape of when we were talking to you to see if we can tell.
Okay.
We can't see anything. We can't see a second plane in the picture. There we see the explosion.
From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, the title of our episode is The Right or Wrong Flat. It's inspired by the shooting of a young man in Dallas, Texas. We came in with some scenes from CBS News and Brian Gumbel of the infamous September 11th, 1991 attacks. And for those that were around at that particular time, it happened around about 10 to 15 minutes to 9 o'clock on September the 11th, 2001, approximately 17 years ago. It was on a Tuesday. I'll not forget that some planes crashed into the towers. According to the Wikipedia here, $10 billion in infrastructure and property damage. Roughly 2,996 people were killed and over 6,000 injured. It was United Airlines and American Airlines that crashed and into the World Trade Center, the north and south towers. You'll hear that described in Brian Gumbel's report here. And it was one of the largest killings of people in the United States, at least up to that point in time. And some of the information here was a bit sketchy, but Brian Gumbel's report, people on the ground, a doorman across the street from the World Trade Center where he could see what was going on. This was in lower Manhattan. And a number of planes were involved. There was also a plane that went down around the Pentagon, and also at the same time in Sharksville, Pennsylvania, another downing. There's always been a bit of mystery, controversy surrounding the September 11 attacks as to who was responsible. And a number of theories were out there. And one of the tragedies of this affair was that the right-wingers, i.e. people like Jones and company, took over the or took on, I should say, the voice of the people that had various theories, commonly called conspiracy theories, out there, and it was on right-wing media primarily, and also overlapped into the monopoly media. The major networks that day, cable news, they all covered it. There was a lot of video, tons of audio from people that had their last words, or final words, from the World Trade Center. And people on the ground that were hit. It was clear from Brian Gumbel's report, people on the ground were hit by debris, a man being on fire, and some people putting him out. So those were some of the 6,000 or more injuries that occurred, and you'll hear, you heard in the broadcast that the 911 operators were telling people to stay put, and that was farcical in itself. Staying put did not help them, but they were on the 108th floor, 104th floor, whatever. The restaurant on the world, been there several times over the years. In fact, we can recall when the property there, the World Trade Center itself, was built upon, we used to go down and get capacitors, radio parts from numerous stores there. That was before the World Trade Center was built in the early 90s. And it was a symbol of the city, over 100 floors. At the time, very tall building there. But when you are that far in the up there, the stairwells would have been the only thing to get you down. And evidently, the plane knocked out some of the stairwells, so the people there were doomed. Now, below that, where there were stairwells, around the 80th floor, 70th floor, etc., people were able to get out. But the problem was on those upper floors, when the building started to collapse, those that had not been able to get out, fortunately, were going down, not coming up. So people that got the message immediately, or watching the TV or watching on the internet, hit the stairwells. Those people had a better chance of surviving. Of course, people that were on the lower floors of the building were able to, no doubt, get out if they were not hit by debris. But many firefighters were also killed because at that time they had trained firefighters to rush to the fire, which was a hopeless situation in that particular incident. And there were other reports that explosions happened before the plane, missiles were fired, etc. And part of the problem is here that the evidence itself was put on barges. I'm talking about the physical evidence, and shipped off to China. So in other words, if you don't have the physical evidence, your forensics is very, very shaky. And at that time, it was only 17 years ago, but the technology today is much, much better. And you look at the video, there was no HD at that time. And even the sound recordings were not what it would have been as the progress we've made since that time, particular time. But it was ripe for all kinds of situations, arguments, but the plane could have caused enough heat to collapse the towers. Testimony from firefighters saying that they heard explosions within the building and not the planes. And that was similar to what happened in Oklahoma City, that people believed the building was wired in advance. And also the timing, a lot of people, particularly in New York, were not at work until 9 o'clock. So they were less. It was not a situation where people were at work at 7 o'clock, but there were meetings going on, like the restaurant on the world there, meeting there, I think it's just 100 people. They were obviously all doomed because they were on the top floor. So that was the 9/11 story. It existed a few years after the event. The Alex Joneses of the world no doubt made a lot of money off of it, and there were various other people. There were, excuse me, groups of structural engineers, etc. They call themselves, what was it, the 9/11 truthers. You always be very careful when you start talking about truthers and not facts, excuse me. So that was the basic saga. Now you'll not hear much of that. In, what was it, 2016? Hillary Clinton literally collapsed after going to one of those celebrations. But as the commemorations. But as the years go, we hear less and less. So we decided we would include this in because it was a major part of history. But on to our episode here, the wrong or right flat in Dallas, Texas. A man by the name of Botham Jean, a very common name from his area of the world. It was 25 years old. He was employed as an accountant, and he was in his flat. Now, a Dallas police type named Amber Guyger, she was 30 years old, claimed that she was on the wrong floor after working roughly 15 hours. And thus she entered an apartment. The door was jarred, according to her story. And she enters, sees Mr. Jean, and kills him. And then she added on here, and you can tell this is a lawyer-type phraseology, drew a gun, gave verbal commands, which were ignored. She didn't give any verbal commands. And basically killed him. Called 911. First turning on the lights while on the call, and upon being asked where she was located, the emergency dispatcher, she returned to the front door and obvious the address and discovered she was in the wrong flat. And there's been video taken of this particular flat, and the doors all look alike. A gentleman showed the keys would only fit. So to explain the situation, it was jarred. Now, you'll hear a news conference given by several Dallas attorneys, and the national litigator Ben Crump from Florida was there at the conference, and he's talking about some of the witnesses that came forward and had went to the district attorney. Now, the Dallas district attorney had turned this case over to the Texas Rangers, and as usual, there's a cookie pattern here. Almost like what we used to call cookbooks. That was where you would find the writs if you wanted a particular writ, and it would be there. And of course, in those days, you would Xerox it, and then you would type it, etc. Now, all of that type of information is online, and you need not do that. But anyway, that's basically what this affidavit was. Of course, there were affidavits there, too. And police used basically a cookbook type affidavit, and that's what this one was, and they enhanced it some to fit the story of the flat. Why was she in the wrong flat? Well, she parked on the wrong floor, went into that particular floor, and it looked like her flat, and the door was open. But in the news conference, the attorneys brought out the fact that police are trained when in that type of situation to always call for backup and not enter a dark place, and it was obviously dark in the place, so she claimed. And other witnesses have said they heard her knocking on Mr. Jean's door and say, "Can I come in?" And of course, when he opened the door, that was the last door he ever opened. And those are some of the questions out there. And the mother of Mr. Jean said several questions remain unanswered. Number one question that I want is what happened. This is Allison Jean told reporters on Monday. I have asked too many questions. I've been told that there are no answers. I'm looking forward to the powers to be to come up with answers to make me more satisfied than we are at the present time. Officers were tight-lipped. That was on Monday. And what happened in Jean's apartment. Now, obviously, they'll be looking to see if there were any prior contacts or relations with this Amber Guyger character. The police chief, who is an African-American named Renee Hall, said that her office was in the process of obtaining, of course, they've obtained the arrest warrant after the Texas Rangers Division. That's out of the that is out of the Texas Department of Public Safety. She surrendered, had been with the police force for 4 years, now is on administrative leave, has been released on a $300,000 bail, which is standing on a manslaughter charge, and that's roughly about $30,000. No doubt put up by the police federation, and is usually what the case is there. And there's a picture here of Mr. Jean and this Amber character, and by NBC5. This is the TV station here. And let me see if I can get a little bit of the audio from, this would be NBC5 in Dallas, Texas. We always attempt to get as local sources if we can, and hopefully this will cooperate with me. And we'll put this on to Facebook as soon as we can here, and I'm not certain as to what 5 did, but we'll see in the moment here. And this is live now. Some things that we have on this particular workstation, it does take a little while to bring this out, and we are just waiting here to get the piece and put it in
murdered and slayed just these past few days. Our lives have been impacted by him, this young man who was living his dream here in Dallas, Texas, and was tragically killed in his own apartment. We're here today because we think as a faith community, it's incredibly important that we also share the community's stance that we want justice in this case. It's incredibly important that justice be served. We believe that the scriptures teach us that justice is not only the way of the people of faith, but that we all ought to have a common concern to ensure that the death of this young man does not become a statistic, but instead we want to ensure that his life matters and that his life is not lost in vain. And so we want to ask and demand both all the systems today to make sure that justice is ensured. We've been working with both Chief Hall, as well as Mayor Rollins, as well as DA Faith Johnson since Friday in the inception. And we commend them for them reaching out to the community, keeping open channels of communication, and updating us throughout this process. We were disappointed that the arrest did take 3 days, but we also understand that was under the hands of the Texas Rangers. And now that the case has been handed now into the hands of the DA, we are believing that DA Faith Johnson and those leaders will handle this case with the utmost clarity, the utmost transparency, and with the utmost commitment to justice. We believe our community is committed to this fact and values that this life must be amended. We long for answers, and we're demanding for justice. That is our cry for today. We are also here today, and I am thankful to all of the pastors that are gathered today. We're here both to also show our support for this family, this grieving mother, grieving brother and sister and father, this family that has lost a loved one. We are praying for them and supporting them in this process. Throughout this journey, we will remain in communication with the city leadership. We're thankful also for Chief Hall making the bold decision to pass this case on to the Texas Rangers so that there will be an independent investigation. We commend her for this decision, and we will continue to hold everyone accountable in this process. The community wants answers, our city wants answers, and we trust that the process may be long, but we ask that this process may be done in a judicial fashion. We are also here because we believe in the power of prayer.
The African American Pastors Coalition, you heard from their news conference. As we depart here, you will hear from the attorneys in Dallas on the ground and Attorney Ben Crump, the national litigator, the man that represented Trayvon Martin, the man that was in Ferguson on Mr. Brown's murder case. He's been traveling the nation representing people out of Tallahassee, or actually Plantation, Florida. We'll move on here now, and some final things on September 11th. We have a situation in Washington where the PLO headquarters was closed by the administration of DJ Trump, period. And that in itself is a signal of the times. I can recall it was the actor Danny Glover was talking about the World Trade Center, and from a New Yorker's standpoint, and you have to understand the basic boroughs. If you were not in Manhattan, you were in Brooklyn, the Bronx, or Staten Island, or wherever. It was a limited impact upon those communities other than the national impact. In other words, it became an international story. But the local New York scene, or if you were over in Jersey or wherever, was different unless you worked in Manhattan. There was a different situation. But what happened after 9/11 was very, very important. It changed the nation. We got the largest government bureaucracy. This is under G.W. Bush, called Homeland Security. It was a step in the American context towards a police state, no doubt about it. And the new laws that were enacted under this particular cloud of 9/11. An incident really that had not ever gotten a proper investigation. There were several commissions appointed, etc., but they basically did not have the forensic evidence to support it. And once more, you had these hijackers. It was a very sordid story. They were in Florida. They were tangled up as the Trump administration with the National Enquirer, which brought up immediately alarm bells. But what we look at is the outcome of it, and various legislation that came about that impacted on the Bill of Rights, no doubt about it. And that is more important than anything else. And then, of course, you had the Iraq War, number 2, supposedly weapons of mass destruction, nothing more than propaganda. There were none. But an excuse to go in and destroy the Iraqi nation. And they did destroy the Iraqi nation. And that has been used in conflict after conflict. Afghanistan with the Taliban. The Taliban actually had nothing to do with this thing. In fact, they interviewed bin Laden, and bin Laden basically was stuck in a cave and knew nothing about it. But he said he was happy. But it shows the distance there, and there were these Saudi nationals that had very peculiar situations. So there were a lot of abnormalities involved in this particular, we call it a caper. But the outcome is much, much different. This whole idea of national security has been able to survive over the 17 years, and we saw it this week in that the Trump administration closed the office of the PLO in Washington, D.C., disallowed $25 million for what would be humanitarian aid on the West Bank Medical Center, what it was, treating Palestinian peoples. and a lot of them injured by the subhuman attacks by the Zionist government that sets in Tel Aviv and would like to move to Jerusalem. But all of these things came about because of 9/11, and they continue to be there. The withdrawal, according to the right winger of Botham, one of the neocons, been around a very long time, a prodigious writer. I wonder if he wrote the anonymous letter to the Times, but we don't know. There have been many, many denials on that front. But what we do know, the withdrawal from the international court that sets at The Hague, and the threat of literally not even allowing judges there into the country, and financial aid cutting that off. That has long been an appendage, basically, of the colonial powers. They used it in Liberia with, in Sierra Leone, I should say, Liberia with Charles Taylor, who is in, as they say, stir there now, and with Milosevic out of the former Yugoslavia. He, of course, died there, but and numerous other people that have been in prison, been tried there, etc., at the behest of Western powers. But now the quote-unquote leader of the Western power gang, the U.S., has decided that they will have nothing to do with it because the Palestinians sent a complaint there to charge the Israelis, occupiers, with war crimes. Now they have redone that. That will continue on, and we'll see where that particular situation goes. But now that the World Court has, as far as the U.S. is concerned, and we don't know about the other so-called Western colonial powers that cover that area. Now, the U.S. is not one of those. Their interest there is basically the Zionist lobby within the U.S., and that in itself is out of Wilsonian foreign policy, which is a racist foreign policy. The leader of the Labor Party, Jerry Cohen, has talked about the issue of Palestine from a historic standpoint. And the problem is with ahistoric people, they don't understand. The Balfour Agreement, the Prime Minister Balfour has a statue there as you enter the Parliament building in the UK. And the history of it, it came out of neocolonialism. The British split up the spoils. That is why Palestine got divided and the Israeli state was set into Palestine. Now that's a matter of history. That's not something, a fable made up by some Arab riding on a magic carpet, so to speak. That is a matter of history. And Jerry Coben, by reminding people of this, has been slated as anti-Semitic. We've seen that charge levied against many, many people, including Abu Abbas and various others. Now, this becomes even more farcical. The Arab peoples are a Semitic people. So how in the hell can a Semitic person become anti-Semitic? That is only in the logic here. Now, this was around before DJ Trump, and very few people actually question that. Because from a historic thing, as far as the Zionist movement was concerned, they were the Semitic people, quote unquote. And they had a biblical story to tell, which it would depend if you were a believer or non-believer. Us non-believers see all of those as just fairy tales, other than the historic factors that surround some of those fables, as we'll call them. Now, not insulting anyone's religion. There are 3 or 4 supposedly monolithic religions. We're talking about Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. They've been around a very long time. Judaism, and then the Christian religion came out of Rome, etc. But you can look at all of these as occupier-type religions, and then, of course, you go to Christianity, Islam, that came after Christianity. We won't get into a biblical, not a biblical, theological lecture here. No reason to, but to remember on 9/11 what actually occurred and where we are actually looking at. Nonetheless, we'll do the sport now, and then we'll go to the news conference by the national litigator, Ben Crump. And I've noticed my thing has changed here. We'll go to ESPN and do this, and we'll do the baseball scores. Baseball being the national pastime here within the U.S. So we'll look at it. We don't do the NFL here. We do college football and other sports that are out there. But we do keep an eye on developments here and where many of these operators are and where they are trying to go. Anyway, this was the NBA, Major League Baseball last night. And incidentally, we will be having the NBA before very long. The Astros were in the Motor City Astros 3-2. The Dodgers were in Cincy and Cincy 10-6 over the Dodgers. Cleveland was in Florida, Rays 6-5. The Brewers were in Wrigley Field and pulled off a win on the Cubs 3-2. John Lester was a loser there. Interesting. The Yankees were in the Twin Cities. Yankees 7-2. A.J. Hip was the winner. And I don't know who the other fellow. It doesn't even matter. Anyway, the White Sox were in Kansas City. The Royals are 4-3 in that contest. The Pirates and Cardinals in St. Louis. High-scoring game there, 8-7 Cards. The Pirates had 13 hits, no errors, and the Cards had 9 hits and 1 error. The D-backs were in the Mile High City. Rockies at 13-2. Still a race going on in the West. And the Rangers and Angels in Southern California. It was the Rangers 5-2. Atlanta and the Giants in San Francisco. Atlanta 4-1, and the Nationals and Phillies were postponed because of rain. We'll see if we can get the standings here for posterity, hopefully. Let's see. Uh-oh. Not sure how we came up with that. We'll try again. This is the regular season standings in Major League Baseball. Hopefully we'll get it. Here we go. The American League East will start off there. Boston still on top, and the Yankees are 8 back. In the Central of the American League, Cleveland is on top. The Twins are 15.5 games back, and forget it. That race is done. In the West, you have Houston, much closer race in the West. And then you have the Oakland Athletics. And Seattle is 10.5 games back. I'm not even sure if Seattle will be even able to get a wild card out of this deal. In the in the National League East, Atlanta is on top. The Phillies have fallen to 5 games back. The Nationals are 8.5 games back. In the Central, the Cubs are on top. The Brewers are chasing them 1 game back. The Cards are 3.5 games back. So there's a race in the National League Central. In the National League West, the Rockies are on top. The Dodgers are 1.5 games back, and the D-backs are 3.5 games back. So really, the only one that's out of it is the Giants, and of course the poor Padres. They're 23 back. The Giants are 12 back. This will do it for us. The title of the episode, The Wrong Flat or Right Flat, based upon the murder of Mr. Jean in Dallas.
Identify his apartment. And there's just other things about his routine that don't comport well with the story that's being offered by Ms. Guyger. Most importantly is that we have independent witnesses who have come forward to offer evidence that we believe refutes the claim that the door was propped open. In fact, the evidence that they've provided it seems to indicate that the door would have been closed at the time that Officer Guyger approached the door. The witnesses that we spoke to, and it's been at least two, and there's been other people that we spoke to directly, and there's been other accounts available on the internet, is that they heard knocking down the hallway, followed by a woman's voice that they believe to be Officer Guyger saying, let me in, followed by a series of knocking, followed by let me in. We shared this evidence with the district attorney's office. At the time that we shared it with them, they were not aware of it. The witnesses came by to speak with the DA's office, and for them, it began to change the direction of how they were looking at the case, and again, flied in the face of some of the narratives that they were hearing at the time.
Yeah. This affidavit is very self-serving. Botham Jean is not here to give his version of what happened because he's dead. Everything we know about this young man, this accountant, this meticulous person, is that he would have locked his door. And what's more logical, those neighbors saying they heard knocking, he opened the door, and she, for whatever reason, shot and killed a person who was in his apartment doing everything he absolutely had the legal right to do. And so we stand firmly that this release of affidavit is some suggestion trying to condone what happened. Give her a break. It's not that bad. Well, it is bad to the Jones family and many sensible people because a young man is dead. He is dead, and we'll never get his version of events.
And just to echo what both Lee and Ben have said, we've only had a brief moment to look at this affidavit, but this is what we were afraid of. When a police officer is allowed to stay on the streets for 72 hours and have access to an attorney, this is what we start to see happen, these type of statements. And it's my understanding that this affidavit was drafted by the Texas Rangers. So that was another concern. Why did the Dallas Police Department give it to the Texas Rangers after they had already said they had enough information to charge this officer with manslaughter? So in essence, what they did was they gave this investigation to the Texas Rangers, and they gave this officer an additional day or two to craft up a story that our client is not here to defend. And we have seen this over and over throughout this country, that officers come up with these stories because they have attorneys assisting them with it. But again, we have to remember, he was at his house. She went into his apartment. And she's now trying to make it appear as if this guy was the bad guy, that he was actually out on the streets committing a crime. That's the narrative they want to make. First, we get that officers are in fear of their lives. Now we're getting something that she went into the wrong apartment and this guy would not follow her commands. What were those commands? I didn't see it in the affidavits. It was not very specific at all. It was very broad and very vague, and it leaves room to add additional stuff, which makes us think it's attorneys that have coached this witness. But again, what we know is that had that officer not stepped in to that apartment, Bo would be here today. There is nothing that he did that justified this officer killing him. we don't believe it should be manslaughter. This was an intentional shooting. Intentional shooting, and this officer should be charged with murder. But to get this affidavit now, we're now seeing that they're trying to put this information out to get sympathy from the public, that this poor officer made a mistake. And it's very unfortunate that an affidavit will come out with this type of information when we've been told all along that they did not want to mess with the integrity of this investigation by releasing information, and now this statement comes forward. It's very problematic.
If we will, and again, I for one outright reject this affidavit, but if we were to entertain this version of events, it's important to know that when Officer Guyger arrived to that door, and she saw, as she alleged, a suspect in her mind that she thought was an intruder. She then began acting as a law enforcement officer. She then began saying, "Hey, put up your hands. Let me see your hands," and giving those commands. And so the idea that this woman was off duty goes away, and now she's behaving or holding herself out as a law enforcement officer, although in the process breaking the law. It's also important to add that this was the affidavit for her manslaughter warrant. In other words, even if we adopted her version of the event, it still provides sufficient probable cause that a crime was committed. But it's the lowest possible crime, and we think that the additional facts that we have, the facts about Botham's processes and routines, about the identifying markers, not only at the front of his door, which would have been the first indicator, but all around his apartment. This is his apartment. This wasn't her apartment, so there wouldn't be the same smell, there wouldn't be the same furniture, there wouldn't be the same lighting patterns. There would have been a number of identifying markers to alert her, including the absence of her dog, which she owned. So if this woman is a dog owner and her dog is not there greeting her or making any noise, it would seem to indicate to her that maybe she had entered the wrong apartment. Entering the wrong apartment is very difficult to do if you are sober. And we understand that a blood sample was taken, and it may be months before we receive the results of that blood sample. However, the information that we've heard up until this point seems to indicate that she was not under the influence of any drugs, and if she was or alcohol, and if she was in her uniform, it would have been inappropriate for her to be under the influence of alcohol. Therefore, if she's sober, going to that door and missing all of those multitude of markers, including the fact that she was on the wrong floor and entering an apartment that was not hers, then it's difficult to buy that narrative. We'll take some questions now, and I assume we're not live anywhere, so I want to discipline my children for a moment. Hey, guys, I need you completely quiet. Quiet.
And before we take a question, we often do this. Common sense. When I start really thinking about this, we're on Lamar. The Dallas Police Headquarters is less than 5 minutes away. Training states that if you go to an apartment and the door appears to be open and you thought that there was a burglar, somebody in there, the simple thing would have been to do was to back out and call the police, call for backup. That's what police officers are trained to do. They're not trained, if they thought it was a burglary, they're going to open the door with your gun out. There was no reason for her at that particular time to go inside that apartment if she thought that someone was in there. She can just call and ask for backup. If she'd have done the proper thing, officers would have come out there, she would have had backup, and by the time backup got there, should have been like, wait a minute, this is not even my apartment. She would have known this. That's common sense, right? But what we see now is justification and trying to make excuses. And when you make excuses and you take excuses to the evidence, it just doesn't add up whatsoever. So when we read this and she states that an apartment was open, come on, how many of us, if we got home after 10 and we saw that the door was possibly open, how many people are going to go inside if we thought that somebody was inside? It makes no sense. And this is the reason why at that point that door was open and she went inside with her gun drawn, she no longer was off duty. We can stop that narrative. This was a police officer. This was not an off-duty shooting. She was on duty investigating what she thought was a crime being committed. So no, she was not an off-duty officer.
So do you guys suggest that there was a confrontation at the door instead of her just walking in, with the witnesses saying that there was banging on the door?
What we're suggesting is that the version of events that is being offered in such a way to mitigate any liability. We don't actually know what happened. We still don't have all the evidence. We know that the evidence that exists contradicts this version of events that seems to offer as little culpability for this officer as possible. And we think it's irresponsible, by the way, for investigators and the district attorney's office, frankly, to only let out this side of the narrative when even they know that they have evidence, even beyond what we have, that would undermine this story. And so when we've been discussing over the past few days about favorable treatment for law enforcement officers during their investigation, the release of this affidavit, we believe, is an additional indication of that.
If you would, describe in more detail the witnesses, what they said, the tone, as much as you can share.
You go first.
Okay, so the witness that we spoke to, who are residents of the apartment, and they live nearby this location. Two of them were at their apartment together. One was happened to be in a quiet room reading a book, and so she was in the best position to hear things. And she heard a pounding at the door. The other one, who was in the living room watching TV, she also heard the same pounding at the door. The person, the key witness, essentially, who heard more because she was in a quiet room reading, said she heard pounding at the door, and she heard "Let me in," shouted by "Let me in," at an elevated tone. She heard more pounding at the door, and then shortly thereafter she heard gunshots. She went in to check with her sister, who happened to also be in the building. That sister told that her sister was outside investigating the gunshots. She grabbed her sister and said, "There's a shooter out there. You need to stay in the apartment complex." The sister says, "No, it's okay. I see a law enforcement officer," meaning this is probably a controlled situation. This person then went out to investigate herself. I missed an important detail. She also heard words. So as she was pounding, and after the gunshots, she heard what she believed to be the voice of a male, what we believe to be the last words of Botham Jean, which was, "Oh my God, why did you do that?" And there was nothing heard after that.
That was the one who was in the quiet room?
Yes.
Oh my God, why did you do that?
Yeah. And what's very significant about this is these are independent witnesses. They don't have a dog in this fight. They're not coming forth to try to save their freedom. They're just saying, this is what we observed. And in fact, they then go out and they videotape the officer pacing on the phone versus trying to offer life-saving aid to the person who she just shot, who she now realizes that was not her apartment, and she's just shot an innocent man. She's not trying to render aid. She's on the phone doing something, talking to somebody. We don't know exactly who, but we know at some point she did talk to her attorneys, and they started getting the narrative together that seems to the family to be very self-serving and to be contradicted by these independent witnesses who are saying what they heard not only after the shooting but before the shooting.
It's also worth noting that this witness didn't run out and report this to social media. She didn't report it to a law enforcement officer because what she just observed was the behavior that she believed to come from law enforcement officer. She did reach directly out to this family and say that, I'm not interested in having my name out or getting attention from this, but there's information that you should know that I believe, she said she believed at the time contradicted the prevailing narrative that was going forward at the time that this officer stumbled into the wrong apartment, because she knew that she heard knocking at the door, and that's inconsistent with someone approach an apartment that's both open or one they believe to be theirs. If you believe the apartment to be yours, you don't knock at the door.
And the other thing, if the door is open, why are you fidgeting with your keys trying to get in if the door is open? Once you put your key in, it's going to go open if it's truly open. So it just seems to not make sense when you step back and think about it logically.
And I'm sorry, I know you have a question, but he brought up an important point, and I think we should all sort of key in on it. Everyone confirms that the officer's key was found in the door. Now, her testimony in this most recent affidavit is that she went into that door not believing anyone was in her apartment. That's not what she went in there. She said she got into the apartment and she saw a shadowy figure. Why didn't you take your key out the door? People don't typically leave their key in the door when entering their apartment. And so that just, among a multitude of other things, it makes no sense. She abandoned her key at the door, went in to look at her apartment, and then found somebody there that she wanted to execute. It's just, there's so many holes in this story. And I wish we could say, and here's what actually happened. We don't know what actually happened. We just know that this story doesn't hold up.
Two questions. The witness, did she say at all to you what a feeling that she got about the sense of what was going on, or possible relationship, if there was a sense of urgency? Is there more, I guess maybe the feeling is what I'm trying to describe.
Sure.
She
described in her words that the voice sound personal, that it sounded desperate, that it was elevated, but it didn't sound like, hey, open up, it's the police. It sounded like, open the door, I want you to talk to me or interact with me. And I can't draw, and she didn't draw any relational aspect from that, but she just said it didn't feel like a dry, authoritarian law enforcement opened the door. It felt personal. I can say that if he was expecting someone, it is not his habit, his routine, or his character to leave the door open, propped open, in order for them to arrive. They would have to knock or call like any other person in order to enter the property. And that's just based on speaking to the family, who knows his routines well, speaking to his best of friends. And we've spoken to his friends and the people who were talking to him that night. None of them were saying that they were headed on their way over to his apartment.
And just to be clear, this witness heard knocking and let me in before gunshots.
Before gunshots. Okay. And to be clear, she also said she heard open up, let me in, which made her think that if she didn't think this was her apartment, why would she be telling somebody on the other side to let me in? It's almost as if this narrative continues to evolve to fit her exoneration. These independent witnesses are saying this is what they heard. And so if you are locked out and your key isn't working in your door, if somebody's in your house, why don't you call them on the cell phone? It's just so many questions as to if she really believed this was her apartment, why would you be knocking on the door?
Or if you thought it was your apartment and you saying let me in, and now you're saying you saw a silhouette, why would you kill somebody in your apartment that you thought perhaps somebody was in your apartment? And if she thought she was at her own apartment and she was knocking on the door saying let me in, why would you shoot somebody?
Question,
and I want to throw this out there, and I'm going to get to your question, but this is an important distinction. This is not somebody that we found on the internet. This is someone who reached directly out to the family. More importantly, this is a person who submitted herself to the district attorney investigators, was able to provide a detailed statement to be questioned by investigators who work for the district attorney's office. This is not something that we're saying take our word for it. Obviously, the DA is not going to turn over their witnesses. Of course, you all can seek them yourselves, but we want to say that we wouldn't come forward with this evidence unless we believed it to be credible, and we find from our own conversations and from their behavior up until this point that these witnesses are very credible.
In the search warrant,
and the only reason we're talking about this is this affidavit somehow has been released that's very one-sided.
Sure.
In the search warrant, it talks about a surveillance system, the potential of there being one. Are you aware that there was any in the house or in the apartment?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Just to clarify, you said that she spoke with the DA, with the investigators from the DA. Do you know if she spoke to investigate with the Texas Rangers, who are the ones who put together the affidavit?
The Texas Rangers failed to find this person. They were aware that she existed. The district attorney asked them to find this person. They put together their affidavit without ever speaking to her.
And how close were these witnesses to the apartment where the shooting happened?
I couldn't give you a proximity. They were close enough to hear.
And certainly that video.
They were
the ones who took the video?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the video, it's in, yeah.
Yeah, the video shows you the proximity.
Was that the video, the person who took the video, was that the girl in the quieter room, the one reading, or the one in the TV room? The one who took the video, was it the girl in the quieter room or
Well,
the TV room?
we don't know. Let's let that.
But you think it was one of them that took the
Yeah.
video?
And then the search warrant, wherever it talks about the cell phone being seized from Bo's living room, and that there was a laptop as well that they looked at, but it was damaged. Do you know anything about those?
We have given you all additional information. Unfortunately, we don't want to give out too much more information that perhaps may interfere with the investigation. We wanted to address this affidavit and some of our concerns with this affidavit and some of the statements that were made by witnesses that contradict this affidavit. But as far as additional stuff that's been confiscated, et cetera, we cannot talk about that type of stuff without risking the investigation.
I know you guys have done a lot of press conferences this weekend and today. What was the last thing you guys have heard from Botham's family about this affidavit? Have they had a chance to read it just yet, or have you guys briefed them about it? And what's the reaction?
We have briefed them about it. This affidavit offers a narrative that is highly inconsistent with the young man that they knew, and highly inconsistent with the evidence that we have in front of them. And they reject it outright, as we do.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.